Welcome to Wild Cowboy Tales. Before you listen, let me know where you're listening from. In the heart of the untamed West, where law was a whisper and greed a roar, Silas the Silent rode alone. He was a man paid to hunt, a shadow against the sun-baked plains, but when he pulled a young woman from the clutches of bloodthirsty robbers, he found himself entangled in a much deeper, far more dangerous game. Her silence was a shield, her eyes held a secret, and the truth she carried was a fuse to a powder keg that threatened to ignite the entire territory. This isn't just a rescue, it's a descent into the dark heart of the frontier, where one girl's hidden truth could unravel empires. And a bounty hunter's reluctant heart might just be the only thing standing between her and a reckoning. Chapter 1. The Ambush at Rattlesnake Ridge. The desert wind carried the scent of dust and distant mesquite, a familiar perfume to Silas the Silent Blackwood. He rode his dun-colored Mustang, Dust, with the easy grace of a man perfectly attuned to his surroundings, his eyes the color of a stormy sky, constantly sweeping the horizon. His current quarry, a petty horse thief named Whiskey Jack, was likely holed up in the shanty town of Dry Gulch, a 2-day ride to the east. The $500 on Jack's head was a good sum, enough to keep Silas in tobacco and beans for a few months, and perhaps even replace the worn leather on his saddle. He was a bounty hunter, a man who lived by the code of the wanted poster, a solitary figure content with the stark simplicity of his life. His journey, however, took an unexpected turn as he approached Rattlesnake Ridge, a jagged spine of rock infamous for its narrow passes and sudden drops. A faint, distant sound, like the sharp crack of a whip, caught his ear. Then another, unmistakably a gunshot. Silas reined Dust to a halt, his hand instinctively going to the well-worn grip of his Colt Peacemaker. Trouble. And usually, trouble meant a chance for a bounty, or at least a reason to stay clear. But the sounds were close, too close, carrying a desperate urgency that pricked at something deeper than his professional detachment. He urged Dust forward, dismounting as he reached a rocky outcrop that offered a view into the pass below. The scene unfolding beneath him was one he'd witnessed many times: a stagecoach, its wheels askew, one horse already down, its driver slumped over the reins. 3 figures, rough-looking men with bandanas covering their faces, were swarming the coach, guns drawn. They were typical highwaymen, probably after the strongbox or anything else of value. But there was something else. A 4th figure, smaller, struggling in the grasp of one of the robbers. A woman. Wealth. Silas felt a familiar tightening in his gut. He didn't involve himself in every roadside skirmish, but the sight of a woman being manhandled by scoundrels always stirred a dormant anger. He wasn't a lawman, but neither was he entirely without a moral compass. He assessed the situation quickly. 3 armed men, one focused on the woman, the other to ransacking the coach. They seemed amateurish, not the seasoned, ruthless killers of the bigger gangs. 13. He decided. He could ride away, let the desert claim its due, or he could intervene. The bounty on Whiskey Jack suddenly seemed less pressing. With a fluid motion, Silas drew his rifle, a Winchester 73 that felt like an extension of his arm. He chambered a round with a soft click, his breath slow and steady. This wasn't about a bounty now. It was about something else, something he couldn't quite name. He picked his first target, the robber grappling with the woman. The shot cracked, echoing off the canyon walls. The robber, struck in the shoulder, yelped and staggered back, releasing his captive. The other 2 bandits, startled, looked around wildly. Silas fired again, sending a bullet kicking up dust near the feet of one of them. A warning shot. "Drop your weapons," Silas's voice, usually quiet, boomed through the pass, amplified by the natural acoustics. "Or the next one won't miss." The 2 remaining robbers, seeing a lone and seen rifleman who obviously meant business, hesitated. Their eyes darted nervously. The one holding the woman had fallen, clutching his bleeding shoulder. With a curse, the other 2 dropped their pistols and threw their hands up, fear overriding their greed. 1. Silas descended cautiously, his rifle still aimed, his eyes never leaving the bandits. The woman, released from her attacker, had stumbled, her dark hair a mess, her clothes disheveled. She looked up as Silas approached, her eyes wide, but surprisingly clear. She wasn't screaming, wasn't crying, just staring, an almost unsettling composure about her. "Tie him up," Silas ordered, indicating the 2 surrendered men. He then turned his attention to the woman. She was young, perhaps in her late teens or early 20s, her face smudged with dirt but still revealing a striking, almost defiant beauty. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, his voice softer now. She shook her head, her gaze sweeping over the scene, then settling on the fallen bandit who was groaning in pain. "No," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady, considering the ordeal. "Just shaken." Her eyes, a startling emerald green, held a depth that belied her apparent youth. She picked up a small, locked wooden box that had fallen from the stagecoach, clutching it tightly to her chest. It was a detail Silas noted, a flicker of an anomaly in the chaos. Most victims were too disoriented to care for anything but their own safety. He watched her for a moment, a sliver of unease joining his relief. This wasn't the reaction of a typical rescued victim. Not entirely. Chapter 2: A Hunter's Instinct. Silas quickly secured the bandits, binding their wrists with rope he carried for such occasions. He checked the stagecoach. The driver was dead, a bullet to the chest. A passenger, an older man, lay motionless, likely also killed in the initial assault. The strong box was pried open, its contents scattered, though the bandits hadn't had time to make off with much. "They won't be riding off anywhere soon," Silas muttered, surveying the scene. No horses left, and the nearest town's a good day's walk. He'd leave them for the circuit rider or sheriff who might pass this way eventually. He turned back to the young woman. She was still clutching the wooden box, her emerald eyes watching him with an unnerving intensity. "My name's Silas Blackwood," he offered. "What's yours, miss?" "Alara Vance," she replied, her voice a low, melodic tone that carried a hint of distant refinement, unexpected in this rugged land. She gestured vaguely at the carnage. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. You saved my life." "Just happened to be passing by," Silas said, his eyes still assessing her. Her composure was remarkable. No tears, no hysteria, just a quiet, almost cold self-possession. She didn't look like someone who had just witnessed a brutal massacre and narrowly escaped assault. He'd seen plenty of terrified women on the trail, and Alara Vance didn't fit the mold. "Where were you headed, Alara?" he asked, trying a different tack. "Santa Fe," she said, her gaze flickering to the horizon. "My father and I. We were traveling there to meet and associate." She gestured to the dead man in the coach. "That was my father." There was still no break in her stoic demeanor, no visible grief, just a statement of fact. This bothered Silas. Grief, even delayed, usually showed itself. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said genuinely. Even hardened men felt the sting of death. She merely nodded. "They were after this," she said, holding up the wooden box. It was a simple, sturdy box, about a foot long, with a heavy brass lock. "They killed my father trying to get it." Silas's eyebrows raised slightly. "What's in it that's worth 2 lives?" Alara's eyes met his, and for the first time, a flicker of something, a guardedness, passed through them. "It's family papers. Important documents." He didn't press. A bounty hunter knew when to let a conversation lie, especially when the answers weren't forthcoming. But his instincts, honed over years of tracking men and deciphering lies, were screaming. This girl was hiding something. Something more than just grief, or the shock of survival. The way she protected that box, the unnerving calm in her eyes, the evasiveness about its contents, it all added up to a riddle. "Well, you can't stay here," Silas said, stepping towards dust. "I'm heading west, towards Redemption. It's a mining camp, not much, but there's a general store, maybe a doctor if you need one. Can take you there." Alara hesitated, her gaze fixed on the setting sun. I have no money, Mr. Blackwood. My father's was taken." "I'm not asking for coin, Alara," Silas said, his voice firm. "But this is the dessert. You can't make it alone. You ride with me, to Redemption. After that, you'll have to figure your own way." He didn't make it sound like an offer, more like a statement of undeniable fact. She was a burden he hadn't sought, but neither could he abandon her to the buzzards. She studied him for a long moment, her green eyes piercing, as if trying to read the depths of his soul. Then, slowly, she nodded. "All right, Mr. Blackwood. I'll ride with you." As he helped her onto dust, placing her in front of him in the saddle, Silas felt the small, locked wooden box pressing against his back as she held it. He could feel its weight, too light for gold, too dense for simple papers. A hunter's instinct told him he'd stumbled into something far more intricate than a simple stagecoach robbery, and Alara Vance, with her silent strength and her mysterious box, was at the very heart of it. He had rescued her from robbers, but the more he looked at her, the more he wondered if he had truly rescued her, or merely taken on a new, far more dangerous burden. Chapter 3: Unsettling Silence. The journey through the parched landscape continued, a stark panorama of endless sky and sun-baked earth. Alara rode in front of Silas on dust, her posture erect, her small wooden box clutched tightly in her lap. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the rhythmic creak of the saddle and the whisper of the wind. Silas, a man accustomed to solitude, found Alara's quietude unsettling. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was with a careful precision, her answers brief and devoid of extraneous detail. He observed her covertly. Her eyes, those piercing emerald depths, were constantly scanning their surroundings, not with the wide-eyed fear of a victim, but with the keen, calculating awareness of a predator, or perhaps a hunted animal. She noticed things he sometimes missed: a distant dust cloud, the faint cry of a hawk, a shift in the wind that promised a change in weather. "Riders," she'd murmur, pointing to a smudge on the horizon long before Silas's own seasoned eyes could distinguish anything. Her instincts, sharp and unyielding, were a stark contrast to her delicate appearance. One evening, as they made a meager camp by a dry creek bed, Silas watched her tend to the small fire he'd started. She moved with an efficiency that suggested a familiarity with hardship, her hands nimble as she added kindling. She still hadn't shed a tear for her father, nor had she mentioned him again. It wasn't stoicism, Silas mused, it was something colder, more detached. "You've been on the trail before, haven't you, Alara?" he asked, pouring them both a cup of strong, black coffee. She paused, stoking the flames with a stick. "My father was a traveling man," she replied, her gaze fixed on the fire. "We moved often. I learned to adapt." The answer was vague, almost rehearsed. "What kind of traveling man?" She hesitated. "I, scholar." He sought out old texts, historical records. He had a particular interest in land deeds and mining claims. Her explanation was plausible enough for the Wild West, a place where fortunes were built on paper as much as on gold. Yet, Silas's gut tightened. Her father's apparent profession didn't quite mesh with the violent attack or the precious, hidden box. He tried a different approach. "That box of yours. You still haven't told me what's so important about family papers that it cost your father his life." Alara's grip on the box tightened, her knuckles turning white. Her eyes flashed a brief, fierce spark of defiance. "It's personal, Mr. Blackwood, and it concerns no one but me." Silas held her gaze, a silent battle of wills. He was used to people trying to hide things, but Alara's secrecy felt like a wall, expertly constructed. He recognized the stubbornness in her, a strength that belied her slender frame. "Out here, Alara, secrets can get you killed. They can get us killed. I saved your life. I'd like to keep it that way. And I don't appreciate being blindsided." A tense silence followed. The desert night pressed in around them, the stars blazing with indifferent intensity. Finally, Alara sighed, a faint exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of a heavy decision. "It's not what you think, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. "My father, he wasn't just a scholar. He was investigating something. Something big. Something powerful. And this box. It holds proof." She paused, her gaze sweeping the dark expanse of the plains, as if expecting eyes to be watching them from the shadows. "The men who attacked the stagecoach. They weren't just common robbers looking for gold. They were after this. After the ledger." Silas felt a jolt. A ledger. Not family papers. This was a significant shift in her story, confirming his suspicions. A ledger could mean many things: business dealings, accounts, or perhaps a record of something far more illicit. His bounty hunter's mind, always seeking patterns, connections, began to piece together a new, more dangerous picture. The petty horse thief and his $500 now seemed insignificant. He had accidentally stumbled into a hornet's nest, and Alara Vance, with her unsettling silence and her deadly secret, was the queen bee. Chapter 4: Whispers in the Wind. Days bled into a week, the relentless westward trek bringing them closer to redemption. The mining camp, Silas had warned Alara, was less a town and more a temporary encampment of fortune-seekers and desperados. Still, it was a place where they might find provisions, and perhaps answers. Silas had a contact there, a grizzled old prospector named Jed who had ears in every saloon and eyes on every trail. As they rode, the weight of Alara's partial confession settled between them. A ledger meant more than just family papers, it meant business, and in the West, business often involved underhanded dealings. Silas's internal compass, usually fixed on the clear path of a bounty, now spun wildly. He was no longer just transporting a rescued victim, he was harboring a woman with a dangerous secret, and by extension, he himself was now entangled in whatever dark currents her ledger represented. They reached the outskirts of redemption just as the sun began its descent, painting the dusty landscape in fiery hues. The camp was a cacophony of shouts, hammering, and the tinny strains of a saloon piano. Men, rough and unwashed, eyed them as they rode in a common sight, a lone rider with a woman in tow, but Silas felt a prickle of unease. He guided Dust towards Jed's rickety shack, nestled on the edge of the camp. Jed, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles, squinted at them from his porch. Silas Blackwood thought the buzzards had finally claimed you, old friend. His eyes, however, quickly darted to Alara, then to the small wooden box she still held. His easy grin faltered, replaced by a wary glint. "And who's this little flower you've plucked from the desert?" "Alara Vance," Silas introduced. His tone clipped. "She survived a stagecoach ambush near Rattlesnake Ridge. Her father was killed. He kept Alara's secret to himself for now." Jed's gaze sharpened. "Rattlesnake Ridge, you say?" "Heard whispers of that. They say it wasn't just common robbers. They were looking for something specific, or someone." He lowered his voice. "Word is, the stage was carrying more than just gold. Something that belonged to one of the big railroad men, a Mr. Thorne. Powerful man, Thorne. Likes his secrets kept quiet, too." Silas felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Thorne. The name was familiar, whispered in saloons and poker games, a shadow figure with significant influence in the burgeoning rail empire. "What kind of secrets?" Jed shrugged, glancing at Alara. "Didn't say. But a few days after the ambush, some unfamiliar men, well-dressed, but with mean eyes, rode through, asking questions. Not about the gold. About a passenger, a man and his daughter, and a package they might have been carrying, too." Alara's grip on the wooden box tightened visibly. Her eyes met Silas's, a silent confirmation of Jed's words. The robbers were a diversion, or perhaps merely hired muscle. The true pursuers were far more dangerous, backed by power and money. 23. "Jed, we need supplies," Silas said, pulling a few coins from his pouch. "And I need you to keep your ears open. If anyone comes asking about us, or about the stagecoach, I want to know." Jed nodded, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a serious frown. "Consider it done, Silas. But be careful, friend. Thorne ain't a man to cross. He's got his hooks deep in these territories, even in lawmen and judges." 4. As Jed disappeared into his shack to gather provisions, Silas turned to Alara. "Thorne, that name mean anything to you?" Alara finally looked away from the box, her face pale. "My father." He suspected Thorne was involved. He was collecting evidence against him. Land fraud, bribery, using his railroad to push out smaller settlers, even murder to silence opposition. She finally revealed the full extent of her secret, her voice barely a whisper. "This ledger. It's a record of everything. My father was taking it to a federal agent in Santa Fe." 4. The full gravity of the situation crashed down on Silas. He hadn't just rescued a girl, he had stumbled upon a conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of power in the territory. He wasn't dealing with common outlaws anymore. He was dealing with men who owned the law, men who would kill to protect their empire of corruption. For his hunter's instinct, once focused on a small-time criminal, now faced a quarry far more dangerous and elusive, the shadowy hand of an empire. And Alara Vance, the silent passenger, was holding the key to its destruction. Chapter 5. A Glimpse of the Shadow. The news from Jed had confirmed Silas's darkest suspicions. Alara wasn't merely a victim, she was a witness, carrying evidence that could topple a powerful, ruthless man like Thorne. This wasn't just about a bounty anymore, it was about justice, a concept often trampled underfoot in the unforgiving West. Silas felt a renewed sense of purpose, mingled with a healthy dose of apprehension. He was no stranger to danger, but fighting a man who could buy and sell sheriffs and judges was a different breed of peril. They left redemption before dawn, Silas opting for less traveled, more arduous routes. He knew Thorn's reach would be long, his resources vast. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant rider a potential pursuer. Alara, now aware that Silas knew the true nature of her burden, seemed to relax slightly, though her vigilance remained. She still clutched the wooden box, but now she occasionally met his gaze with a look of shared understanding, a silent pact against a common enemy. One afternoon, as they traversed a narrow canyon trail, the silence was abruptly shattered. A sharp crack, not of a rifle, but a pistol, echoed off the stone walls. A bullet whizzed past Silas's head, kicking up dust from a rock beside him. "Ambush!" he roared, instinctively pulling dust to a halt and drawing his Colt. 3 riders, masked and armed, emerged from the high rocks, their horses scrambling down the treacherous slope. These weren't the disorganized bandits from Rattlesnake Ridge. These men moved with a practiced precision, their horses well-trained, their movements coordinated. They were Thorn's men, the professional enforcers Jed had warned about. Silas returned fire, his shots precise, forcing one of the attackers to duck behind a boulder. But their numbers were against him, and the terrain offered little cover. He risked a glance at Alara, expecting to see terror. Instead, her eyes were narrow, assessing. Before he could warn her, she moved. With a sudden, unexpected agility, Alara produced a small, silver-handled derringer from a hidden pocket in her skirt. It was a lady's weapon, compact and lethal. She aimed with startling swiftness and fired. The shot was low, but accurate, striking the lead horse in the leg. The animal shrieked, collapsing and throwing its rider to the ground. 5. Silas stared, a mixture of shock and reluctant admiration. He hadn't known she possessed a weapon, much less the skill to use it. The glimpse of this hidden capacity, this dangerous competence, solidified his growing suspicion about her. She was far from the helpless victim he had initially rescued. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Silas demanded, reloading his own pistol, as the remaining 2 attackers regrouped, momentarily disoriented by Alara's surprising move. "My father insisted I learn," Alara replied, her voice clipped, her attention fully on the fight. She reloaded her derringer with nimble fingers, a task most men struggled with under pressure. Said a woman in the West needed to protect herself. The explanation was reasonable, but the calm efficiency with which she performed the action was anything but. Silas felt a new wave of unease. Her father, the scholar, had taught her to shoot with a derringer, and her composure in a firefight was unnerving. He watched her fire again, forcing another attacker to seek cover. Her shots were small, but distracting, creating openings for Silas to press his advantage. This was a partnership born of necessity, but a dangerous one, as Alara's secrets began to unravel, revealing a steel core beneath her outwardly vulnerable exterior. They fought as a surprisingly effective unit. Silas, with his rifle and Colt, engaged the primary threats, while Alara's precise, well-placed derringer shots harried the attackers, keeping them off balance. Eventually, 2 of Thorn's men lay dead, and the third, wounded, retreated, disappearing back into the rocks. Silas slowly lowered his rifle, handing the empty canyon. He turned to Alara, his expression stern. "Alara, we need to talk. All of it." Now, he knew she had more to hide, and he was no longer willing to ride blind into a war he barely understood, especially when his companion was proving to be as much of an enigma as the enemies they faced. Chapter 6. The Unveiling. The sun dipped below the canyon rim, casting long, purple shadows as Silas and Alara made camp in a hidden alcove. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and unspoken questions hanging between them. After the ambush, Silas knew he couldn't afford to be in the dark any longer. Alara's surprising skill with the derringer, her unnerving calm in the face of death, demanded answers. He sat opposite her by the meager fire, his eyes fixed on her. "All right, Alara. No more half-truths. That wasn't just my father insisted I learn. That was the hand of someone who's seen a lot of trouble. What else aren't you telling me?" Alara met his gaze, her emerald eyes reflecting the firelight. revealing a flicker of resignation. She looked down at the wooden box in her lap, her fingers tracing its worn edges. "You're right, Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice low. "My father was no ordinary scholar. And this isn't just a ledger." She carefully unlatched the brass lock, a soft click breaking the silence. Inside, nestled amidst layers of protective cloth, was a thick, leather-bound book. It wasn't just any book, it was a meticulously kept record, filled with tight, precise handwriting. "For my father, Elias Vance," she explained, "was an auditor. But not for any typical company. He was working undercover for a federal inquiry, investigating the corruption spreading like wildfire through these territories. His target was a man named Thorne, the railroad baron you mentioned." "For?" Silas felt a cold dread intertwine with a grudging respect. This was far bigger than he had imagined. A federal inquiry. Undercover. Alara nodded. "Thorne, and men like him, are buying up land, rigging bids for government contracts, bribing officials, and running protection rackets, all under the guise of legitimate business. They use the railroad as their personal empire, crushing anyone who stands in their way. My father collected proof, dates, names, amounts. This," she said, tapping the ledger, "is a detailed account of their illicit empire. It implicates senators, judges, powerful land speculators, even a few U.S. Marshals who've turned a blind eye for a share of the spoils." 46. Silas whistled softly, a low, impressed sound. "That's a death sentence, Alara. Not just for Thorne, but for anyone who carries it." 78. "Precisely," she said, her voice grim. "My father knew the risks. He planned to deliver this ledger to a trusted federal agent in Santa Fe. The stagecoach ambush was no random act. The robbers were Thorne's men. They weren't after gold, they were after this ledger, and anyone carrying it." Her eyes met his, filled with a raw, desperate resolve. "They killed my father for this, Mr. Blackwood. And they won't stop until they have it, and me, too." The truth, stark and brutal, settled over Silas. He wasn't just a bounty hunter who had stumbled upon a stagecoach robbery. He had inadvertently become protector of the most dangerous secret in the entire territory, a secret that could dismantle an empire and expose the rot at the heart of the burgeoning West. He had rescued her from common robbers, but her secret was indeed far more perilous. It painted a target not just on Alara's back, but squarely on his own. "So, you weren't just a passenger," Silas stated, a realization dawning on him. "You were carrying this. You were part of your father's mission." Alara's jaw tightened. "I was his backup, his contingency. If anything happened to him, I was to ensure the ledger reached the federal agent." She closed the box with a decisive click. "Now you know, Mr. Blackwood, the full truth. You can ride away. Leave me and this burden behind. I wouldn't blame you." Silas looked at the fire, at the vast, indifferent wilderness around them. His life had always been about clear-cut lines, wanted posters, bounties, justice in its simplest, most brutal form. This was different. This was fighting a phantom enemy with endless resources, a battle against the very fabric of power. Yet, looking at Alara, at her quiet courage and unwavering determination, he knew he couldn't leave her. He had saved her life, and now, he was bound by something more than just a passing encounter. He was bound by the truth she carried, and by the implicit promise of justice. "No," Silas said, his voice firm, resolute. "I won't leave you. You're my responsibility now. And if Thorne wants this ledger, he's going to have to come through me." He looked at her, a hint of a grim smile playing on his lips. "Sounds like this federal agent in Santa Fe has quite the package coming his way. We'd best make sure it gets there." The silence that followed was no longer unsettling, but a quiet understanding, a dangerous alliance forged in the heart of a corrupt land. Chapter 7. Hunted. The revelation of the ledger transformed their journey. They were no longer simply traveling, they were hunted. Every rock, every distant rider, every whisper of wind now carried the potential for deadly confrontation. Silas, with his years of tracking and evading, took on the role of guardian with a grim determination. Alara, in turn, became an indispensable partner, her sharp instincts and knowledge of her father's mission proving invaluable. She knew the names of some of the players in Thorne's network, bits of information her father had imparted, details that helped Silas anticipate their enemies' moves. 4. Their path to Santa Fe, once a straightforward route, became a winding maze of back trails, hidden canyons, and remote homesteads. Silas eschewed towns, preferring to ride through the desolate expanses where Thorne's men would have fewer places to hide and fewer allies. They rationed their supplies meticulously, living off the land with Silas's impressive survival skills. One morning, as they watered their horses at a secluded spring, Alara noticed something glinting in the sun on a distant ridge. "Riders," she whispered, her voice tight. "Too many. And they're too organized to be simple prospectors." Silas confirmed her observation through his field glasses. "Thorne's men. And they've got trackers. They're closing in." His jaw tightened. "We're going to have to run." They mounted their horses and pushed them hard, deeper into the rugged foothills. The chase was relentless. Thorne's men, better mounted and seemingly limitless in number, pressed them from behind. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dust. Silas returned fire sparingly, aiming for the horses to slow their pursuers, knowing that every shot counted. "They won't stop, Silas," Alara shouted over the thunder of hooves, clutching the ledger to her chest. "They know what we carry. Then we make them work for it," he yelled back, urging dust to greater speed. He navigated the treacherous terrain with practiced ease, taking risks that would have broken lesser riders. Alara, holding on tight, marveled at his skill, his unwavering courage in the face of overwhelming odds. He was more than a bounty hunter, he was a force of nature, driven by a quiet, fierce code. They managed to put some distance between themselves and their pursuers, but the respite was brief. As they crested a rise, they saw another group of riders ahead, blocking their path. Thorne was coordinating his hunt, using his vast resources to cut off every escape route. They were caught between two forces. Silas quickly assessed their predicament. To fight both groups would be suicide. There was only one way out. "Hold on tight, Alara," he shouted, suddenly veering dust sharply, plunging off the main trail and down a steep, rocky ravine, a descent that seemed impossible. Alara gasped, bracing herself, trusting Silas completely as dust picked his way down the perilous slope, loose stones tumbling around them. The pursuers hesitated, unwilling to risk their horses and necks on such a dangerous path. The sounds of their shouts and frustrated curses faded as Silas and Alara plunged deeper into the ravine, momentarily escaping their clutches. They had bought themselves time, but the close call served as a stark reminder of the immense power they were up against. As they rode deeper into the desolate, winding gulch, Alara looked at Silas, her face pale but resolute. "They truly will stop at nothing, won't they?" Silas nodded grimly. "Not when an empire is at stake. Your secret, Alara, has made us targets of every corrupt man Thorne controls." He patted the stock of his rifle. "But an empire can be brought down. One bullet, one truth, at a time. And we have the truth." The hunt had just intensified, transforming them from mere travelers into desperate fugitives, their survival now inextricably linked to the ledger they carried. Chapter 8: Running the Gauntlet. The ravine provided temporary reprieve, but Silas knew it wouldn't last. Thorne's men, though momentarily deterred, would undoubtedly find another way to corner them. Their escape was a brief gasp of air before plunging back into the depths of a deadly game. They rode through the night, pushing dust and themselves to their limits, fueled by adrenaline and the grim knowledge of what awaited them if caught. Alara's knowledge proved invaluable. She recalled details her father had noted in passing, obscure names of Thorne's associates, rumors of safe houses, or corrupt deputies. This intel allowed Silas to anticipate potential traps, veering them away from known Thorne-controlled outposts and into unexpected, wilder routes. He taught her how to read tracks, how to identify different horse breeds, and how to spot the subtle signs of a hidden ambush. They became a finely tuned machine, a desperate partnership against a relentless foe. "My father had a contact, a U.S. Marshal named Thompson," Alara mentioned one dusty morning, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "He was supposed to be the one to receive the ledger. He's based in Santa Fe, but sometimes operates out of a small federal office near Fort Reliance." "Fort Reliance," Silas repeated, the name sparking a memory. "That's a day's ride north of here. A federal post, small, but usually safe. It's a risk, but it might be our best shot." The journey to Fort Reliance was a gauntlet. They crossed open plains, dodging riders who seemed to materialize from the shimmering heat haze. They scaled rocky escarpments, scrambling up narrow paths where one wrong step meant a fatal fall. They slept in caves and under sparse brush, always with one eye open, their ears strained for the telltale sounds of pursuit. One afternoon, as they were cutting across a wide, flat mesa, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. He was dressed like a cowboy, but his posture, his unwavering gaze, spoke of a different purpose. "He's been following us for hours," Laura whispered, her hand instinctively going to her derringer. "Too far to be a random traveler." Silas nodded, his face grim. "A scout. He's signaling their position. They're baiting us, trying to funnel us into a trap." He saw a cluster of low hills in the distance, a natural defensive position. "We head for those hills. We make our stand there if we have to." They spurred their horses, a desperate race against the closing net. The scout, seeing their intention, galloped harder, trying to cut them off, sending up puffs of dust. Silas drew his rifle, aiming carefully. He wouldn't kill the man, not if he could avoid it, but he needed to disable him. A shot rang out, hitting the scout's horse in the rump. The animal bucked and whinnied, throwing its rider. The scout lay still for a moment, then groaned, clutching his leg. He was out of the fight. They reached the hills, finding a natural defile that offered cover and a clear line of sight. Silas dismounted, pulling Alara down beside him. "They'll be here soon," he said, checking his rifle. "We hold them off here. If we can reach Fort Reliance, we might have a chance." Alara, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, looked at him, her emerald eyes filled with a fierce resolve. "We will reach it, Silas. My father's work. It won't be for nothing." She opened the wooden box, running her fingers over the leather-bound ledger. It was no longer just a burden, it was a testament, a weapon in their fight for justice. She knew that the true danger wasn't just the bullets and the bandits, but the insidious corruption that permeated the very land. And she, a simple girl who had lost everything, was determined to expose it, with the silent, unwavering bounty hunter by her side. The gauntlet was far from over, but for the first time, Alara felt a surge of defiant hope. Chapter 9. The Devil's Bargain. The hills around them soon swarmed with Thorn's men. They arrived like a dark tide, their numbers overwhelming, their intent chillingly clear. Silas and Alara were pinned down, their position offering scant protection against a determined assault. The crackle of rifle fire echoed through the hills, punctuated by the whiz of bullets embedding themselves in the rocks around them. "There's too many, Silas," Alara yelled, ducking as a bullet chipped stone near her head. Her derringer, though accurate, was no match for the sheer volume of incoming fire. Silas, his face grim, fired back with deadly precision, trying to thin their ranks. "We just need to hold them until dark. Then we make a break for it." Then, a voice boomed from the approaching riders, cold and authoritative. "Silas Blackwood. And the girl? Throw down your weapons, and no more blood has to be shed." It was a man on a magnificent black stallion, his face scarred and cruel, his eyes like chips of obsidian. This was Thorn, no longer a shadowy figure, but a menacing presence. He was accompanied by a stern-faced man in a U.S. Marshal's uniform, Marshal Dalton, the man Alara's father had been wary of, confirming her father's fears of deep-seated corruption. "For," Alara gasped, recognizing Dalton. "It's him, Silas. Marshal Dalton. My father said he was on Thorn's payroll. The federal agent, their last hope, was compromised." Thorn chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Smart girl. Your father had a keen eye for rot, didn't he?" A pity he couldn't see his own end coming, his gaze fixed on Alara, then on the wooden box. "Now, the ledger, girl. Hand it over, and perhaps Marshal Dalton here can overlook your minor transgressions." "You killed my father," Alara screamed, her composure finally shattering, replaced by a surge of raw fury. "He was a busybody," Thorn shrugged, as if discussing a nuisance. "Got in the way. Just like you two. Now, the ledger. Or we send you to join him in the dust." Silas aimed his rifle directly at Thorn. "You'll have to earn it, Thorn. And it'll cost you." "A brave sentiment, Blackwood," Thorn sneered. "But foolish. You're outnumbered. Outgunned. There's no escape." He glanced at Dalton. "Marshal, do your duty. These are fugitives, resisting arrest, and in possession of stolen property." For Dalton, his face impassive, drew his pistol. His actions confirmed the depth of Thorne's influence. The law itself was now turned against them. Silas understood. This wasn't just a battle for their lives, it was a battle for the truth, against a system rigged by greed and power. 4. As Thorne's men began to advance, Silas made a decision. "Alara," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You see that narrow crevice behind us? Once I create a diversion, you take dust, ride for it. Don't look back. Don't stop until you reach Santa Fe. Find someone, anyone, who will listen to the truth in that ledger." "No," Alara protested. "I won't leave you." "You have to," Silas insisted, his gaze fierce. "This is your mission, Alara, not mine. Your father died for that ledger. Don't let his sacrifice be in vain." He knew this was likely a suicide mission for him, but the ledger had to get through. The truth had to see the light of day. With a final, desperate look at her, Silas pushed her towards dust. Then, he exploded into action. He threw a stick of dynamite he'd been carrying for emergencies, a desperate gambit, towards the closest group of Thorne's men. The explosion ripped through the air, sending dust and rock flying, creating a moment of chaos. "One, go," Silas roared, laying down a barrage of suppressive fire with his rifle. Alara hesitated for a heartbeat, her heart tearing between loyalty and the immense weight of her mission. Then, with tears streaming down her face, she swung onto dust, digging her heels in, and galloped towards the crevice as Thorne's men, recovering from the blast, focused their fire on Silas. The lone, defiant bounty hunter making his last stand against the overwhelming force of corruption. The battle at the hills was a desperate reckoning, a deadly bargain, and for Alara, a painful, solitary dash towards an uncertain future, carrying the fragile hope of justice in her hands. Chapter 10: Justice and New Horizons. Alara rode like the wind, dust's hooves pounding a frantic rhythm against the unforgiving earth. Behind her, the sounds of the gunfight slowly faded, replaced by the thumping of her own heart and the whispered echoes of Silas's sacrifice. Tears streamed down her face, hot and stinging against the dust and wind. She clutched the wooden box to her chest, its weight a constant reminder of her father's legacy and Silas's last stand. She couldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. She wouldn't. Days later, gaunt and exhausted, Alara finally reached Santa Fe. The bustling town, with its adobe buildings and narrow streets, felt like a world away from the desolate canyons she had traversed. She knew she was still hunted, the danger ever present, but she had to complete her mission. She sought out the federal building, a grand stone edifice in the center of town. Inside, she navigated the labyrinthine corridors, her eyes scanning every face, trusting no one. She finally found the office of a high-ranking federal agent, one her father had spoken of with cautious optimism, Agent Reynolds. He was a stern, bespectacled man, initially dismissive of a disheveled young woman clutching a wooden box. "My name is Alara Vance," she announced, her voice hoarse but firm. "And I have something that will expose Thorne and his entire corrupt empire." She placed the ledger on his desk. 4. Agent Reynolds, intrigued by her conviction, cautiously opened the box and began to read. As he turned page after page, his expression shifted from skepticism to shock, then to cold, furious determination. The meticulous records, the names, the dates, the undeniable proof of Thorne's vast network of bribery, land fraud, and murder, laid bare the dark underbelly of the territory. 46. The exposure of Thorne's empire sent shockwaves across the West. Investigations were launched, arrests were made, and powerful men found their illicit empires crumbling. Marshal Dalton was stripped of his badge and faced charges. Thorne himself, though initially attempting to flee, was eventually cornered and brought to justice, his power broken, his name synonymous with corruption. 4. Alara, having delivered the ledger, found herself a key witness, her testimony crucial in the ensuing trials. The process was long and arduous, but she faced it with the same quiet strength she had shown in the desert. Justice, however slow, was finally being served. Weeks later, with the dust of the legal battles beginning to settle, Alara found herself standing on a quiet street in Santa Fe, the weight of the ledger no longer on her shoulders. She was free, but the cost had been immense. Her father, her family, and Silas. A figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby alley, tall and lean, his silhouette instantly recognizable. Alara's breath caught in her throat. It was Silas. He was bruised, his arm in a sling, but alive. He looked weary, but his storm-colored eyes held their familiar glint. "Silas," she whispered, a flood of relief washing over her. She ran to him, embracing him fiercely. He winced slightly from his injury but returned the embrace, a rare, soft smile touching his lips. "Thought you'd given up on me, Laura." "Never," she replied, pulling back, her eyes shining with tears. I thought you were gone." "Hard to get rid of an old wolf," he chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "I drew them off, found a way to double back. Took some doing, but here I am." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the bustling sounds of Santa Fe a gentle backdrop to their quiet reunion. The shared ordeal, the desperate run, the battle against overwhelming odds, it had forged an unbreakable bond between them. "So," Silas finally said, his gaze sweeping the horizon, "Thorne's done for." The ledger did its work. "Yes," Laura confirmed. "Justice was done. Thanks to you." He looked at her, his eyes serious. "And thanks to you, Laura. You saw it through. Your father would be proud." A new feeling stirred within Laura, a blend of hope and possibility. She had completed her mission, faced her fears, and survived. And now, the man who had pulled her from the desert's grasp, the solitary bounty hunter, was standing beside her. The West was still untamed, full of new dangers, but also new opportunities. "What now, Silas?" she asked, her voice soft. He looked at her, a hint of something new in his eyes, an invitation, a shared future. "The West is wide, Laura. Plenty of trails to ride, plenty of wrongs left to right. Maybe we ride them together." Laura smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her emerald eyes. The journey had been harrowing, her secret more dangerous than any bounty, but it had also led her to an unlikely partner, a man who, against all odds, had helped her bring light to darkness. The future was unwritten, but for the first time since her world shattered, Laura Vance looked towards the new horizon with a fierce, quiet hope, ready to face whatever new trails lay ahead, with Silas, the silent bounty hunter, by her side.